The Suicide Squad is the all-new DC remake of Suicide Squad. The original 2016 film was notoriously panned upon release, existing as an example of the worst of desperate studio interference. And upon seeing the first trailers for this new one, I found it amusing that Warner Brothers effectively admitted defeat and just started all over again. I never saw the original Suicide Squad at the time, my superhero fatigue was really starting to set in then, but I decided to give it a shot in preparation for this new one, and oh boy, what a bizarre mess of a film. Suicide Squad 2016 is a baffling experience that barely feels like a movie. The first half is a near constant barrage of quirky edits and in-your-face pop music, yet somehow lacking any actual scenes with a clear beginning, middle, and an end. Everything just weirdly meshes together to feel like one long montage. It's no secret at this point that a trailer house edited half of this film, and yeah, you can really tell. The editing is jarring and distracting, with a constant use of slow motion and strange cuts. It literally feels like an overextended trailer. I also always hated the design for Jared Leto's Joker, and it feels so vindicating to finally watch this and see how embarrassingly obnoxious he is. It's everything I feared the character would be and then some. So this then brings us up to the Suicide Squad. Is it better than the original?
Yes!
The Suicide Squad feels like an entirely different beast of a film. Unlike the first, it has actual scenes that you can follow and that progress the story. You know, like an actual movie. I had a good time with this film. It had a lot of personality and a fun cast of characters. The original Suicide Squad tries to introduce its characters through a convoluted montage of visuals, flashbacks, a conversation around a dinner table that then turns into a voiceover, then another debriefing scene that introduces everyone all over again. The Suicide Squad just casually introduces our characters one by one and lets us learn about them through how they interact with each other. It feels so much more natural. I thought Idris Elba as Bloodsport was a ton of fun to watch and has the perfect voice for playing a more reactionary straight man. Plus, the film takes time to develop a more sensitive and emotional side to his character. John Cena is a fucking blast in this. He plays an incredibly charismatic asshole, and I love how he and Idris's characters basically have the same abilities. They develop a squabbling rivalry over this, which is a ton of fun. I can see Polka Dot Man becoming a favorite of many. He's just such a bizarre yet endearing character, and his design is so wonderfully goofy. Yet the movie plays him completely straight, which only enhances the humor. Despite how ridiculous his concept is, the film still manages to develop an entertaining emotional core to his character, which makes for some wonderful visual comedy. I also really like Ratcatcher 2, just another compelling character, one who's far more good-hearted than many of the others. She also has a nice emotional side to her character, one that allows her to build a relationship with Bloodsport. She's very much the heart of this film, and her rat controlling powers are both hilarious and adorable. And last but not least, there's Nanaue. Very much a Groot-esque character for this film, but even he gets some emotional development and a bunch of fun jokes. The CGI was also really solid for him, and I never had any issues suspending my disbelief. Plot-wise, I'd say the premise of this film definitely feels a lot more appropriate than the original. It's one where these characters are treated as disposable and doing the dirty work, rather than assembling a team to face space beings and some giant witch monster. I think part of why I like this film is how little like a superhero film it felt. It's kinda crazy to me that this is a DC film, as with the exception of Harley Quinn, the cast of characters are far from flagships of the franchise. They could just have easily been totally original creations in some sort of superhero spoof. Admittedly, the film has a more traditional Marvel-style climax, but one that does feel earned by the narrative. And thankfully there isn't a blue laser in sight. Instead, we get a gigantic starfish. The costume design is also great. I'm glad to see less generic tactical wear, adopting more of a campy and ridiculous style. Yet I also love that, despite their costumes, I can still take these characters completely seriously, because the film treats them seriously. Even some of the character moments strike a perfect balance between earnestly heartfelt and completely ridiculous at the same time. Now, being a James Gunn film, there's a clear comedic voice to it. The only other films of his I've seen are Slither and the first Guardians film, but I enjoyed the sense of humor both of those had, and this film falls in line with them. There's a good variety of comedy. It's not just quippy lines, though there's still plenty of character banter to enjoy. Some really fun set pieces that blend action and humor, especially Bloodsport in the collapsing building, and in keeping with Gunn's style, there's plenty of gratuitous but very comedic gore. Now, if I did have one criticism, it would be the look of the film. Don't get me wrong, the direction and cinematography is all very good, even quite creative at times, but something about the palette and visual style I find kind of off-putting. I imagine this comes down to personal preference, and it's still far better than the original, but the film often looks a little washed out and overly gritty. There is colour here, but overall it has a very muted and overly blue look to it. At times it was kind of hard to see exactly what was happening, especially during night scenes, and even during the day the texture of the film was just kind of cluttered. I understand this is supposed to be a darker, grittier film, but I feel you can still make something dark yet visually visually striking. It's only a minor complaint though. I also feel the film's pacing could have been a bit tighter. At just over 2 hours, it's not the longest film, but I found my engagement wavering a little towards the middle. Admittedly, I am a sucker for the 90-minute film format, so this could just be personal preference again. Now, one of the holdovers from the original Suicide Squad is Harley Quinn, played by Margot Robbie. With the original, I never really got the hype around this take on the character. It just felt like it was trying so hard to push her as this crazy, quirky sex symbol, but I mainly just found her grating.
Love your perfume. What is that? The stench of death?
However, here, she's so much better. She has a lot of fun jokes and dialogue, most of which is based in bathos, but I think what makes it work here is that Harley Quinn herself is played completely straight. She's saying funny things, but it never feels like she's deliberately cracking a joke or undermining the situation. Everything she's saying is completely sincere, she's just being Harley Quinn. One of the highlights is an action set piece she gets, which features some really interesting camera movements and a great visual flair. But there is a part of me that feels her inclusion is just a little superfluous. She's a lot of fun, but her story and character just doesn't quite gel with the rest of the film's personality, and it ends up seeming like she's there purely for name recognition. Much like Gunn's Guardians films, the Suicide Squad has a healthy use of pop music. This is something the original wanted to imitate so badly, which unfortunately turned into an onslaught of song after song, seemingly plastered into the film at random.
Welcome to the party, Captain Boomerang.
They were always distracting and obnoxious, even when the songs themselves were good. However, here, the music is used far more appropriately. It always complements the tone of the scene and avoids feeling in your face. You recognize the songs are there, but they comfortably meld into part of the overall experience. The legend himself, Pietro Campaldini, shows up, and although his role is a bit smaller than I would have liked, it's great to see him in Hollywood. The film is also full of misdirects and twists and turns, some which result in pretty great comedic payoffs. And speaking of payoffs, we have some pretty satisfying Chekhov's gun in here, which I always like to see. So yeah, in the end, The Suicide Squad might be a DC film, as well as a remake of one of their worst, but it definitely doesn't feel like another generic superhero flick. Instead, it just feels like a film. Something someone wanted to make and had a unique vision for. I don't feel like I'm being pandered to because, wow, the Joker's costume in this scene is a reference to the comics. And whilst I don't doubt there are references in here, the film is also enjoyable purely for what it is, not because of fan service or things it reminds me of. Ultimately, I'm really glad I checked out The Suicide Squad, and I hope this paves the way for DC's future approach to films. They've already shown countless times that simply mimicking Marvel's formula and allowing studios to interfere just doesn't result in a good final product. So I really hope that DC embraces the chance to give these creative storytellers a voice and just let them make films. It would be something genuinely refreshing that would distinguish itself from Marvel. Plus, it's a ton of fun to explore these lesser known characters, rather than serving up the same few names year after year. If you're simply looking for a fun time, likable characters, and some neat action, then The Suicide Squad has you covered. I don't know how to end this video.